Hello everybody, my name is Shortline 819 and welcome back to Shortline's Rail News and Comment, another episode of this series, which I don't know what this series is anymore. It's just me rambling in front of my phone. Although it's mostly because I don't really have the time to research and edit these videos nowadays, because turns out going to college for supply chain stuff is very hard, but it takes up a lot of time. But today we're going to be talking about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, which of course is railroad mergers, is a topic that I'm a little bit obsessed with. And we're going to be talking about this because there was an article in Trains Magazine by Bill Stevens, which you should absolutely go read and go support Trains Magazine. It's linked down below. Basically talking about how the Class 1 railroads have begun to take a new, fresh look at potential mergers, which is very big because we really haven't had a whole lot of those in the last 20 years. You know, CPKC and Hunter Harrison shenanigans notwithstanding, of course. Now, what exactly has changed? Well, of course, for the last 20-25 years, you've almost had, outside of CPKC and various smaller acquisitions, you've had almost sort of a stalemate in terms of railroads. No big Class 1 mergers have occurred outside of CPKC. And of course, Canadian Pacific under Hunter Harrison tried with CSX and NS, but that didn't go anywhere. So you've had this sort of situation where we're just used to having 6 big Class 1 railroads and nothing really has changed. And that's primarily because the regulatory environment has not been favorable at all towards any sort of future Class 1 railroad mergers. Now, that being said, a couple of things have changed. First, so every railroad, something to point out, is that every major Class 1 railroad, they always do these studies. They do these routine studies every few years where they look at all the other Class 1 railroads and say, okay, who would be good to merge with? For the most part, these studies are more or less confined to small teams in the basements of various railroad headquarters. And, maybe there's a report up to the CEO, but they don't really get outside of that. What's changed is independent analysis. Anthony B. Hatch, who is very well trusted within the railroad industry, in the larger railroad sphere, has basically said these studies have escaped the basement, so to speak. And several railroads, 3 railroads in particular, he mentions, have begun to bring these studies to the board, to their various boards, which is... that could mean nothing or it could mean a whole lot. It means that the Class 1s are taking the potential of a merger with another Class 1 more seriously than they have before. So what exactly has changed, right? How have you gone from a scenario where there's been very little action in this regard to the potential, I should say, not that no Class 1 railroad has announced a merger. It's just they're looking at it more seriously. What has changed in this regard? Well, we all know that the past couple of years has not been particularly the best for railroads, just sort of in general. A large part of it is their unmaking. A large part of it, frankly, isn't their unmaking. You had the sort of precision scheduled railroading phase, which had its ups and downs and hell of a lot of downs. Traffic has more or less been stagnant. In part because railroads, frankly, are not the best nowadays at keeping customers, retaining customers, bringing on new customers. They're not the best at service, and they admit that themselves. You've also had various economic shocks. You, of course, had the pandemic, and then the economic uncertainty after that, and now you have even more economic uncertainty because of tariffs, which could impact the railroads pretty heavily. And this has sort of resulted in a perfect storm where, traffic is flatlined, profits have flatlined, which doesn't make Wall Street happy at all. You've had attempts by various railroads to try and capture more traffic. BNSF, CPKC, CSX have been good at that. NS tried, really didn't work out. Canadian National, Union Pacific, So now they're looking at, okay, well, if we actually want to grow in terms of traffic and profitability, maybe we could look at a merger. And that's been helped by the fact that the regulatory environment has the potential to change, especially under the current administration, who has been very. They've been rolling back a lot of regulations, just sort of in general, but also including in the railroading industry. And of course, you have the Surface Transportation Board, which is increasingly more Republican sort of free market and sort of its outlook, which might be more favorable towards Class 1 mergers. So that's sort of why they're taking a bit more of a serious look. It's kind of a combination of their own stagnation plus a potential opportunity that it might be a bit easier to get a major merger through than it has been over the past 25 years. Now, Trains Magazine, they have neatly compiled, and they've also asked various railroads what their thoughts are on this, and a couple responded, a couple didn't. The biggest sort of response is from Jim Vina at Union Pacific. He's CEO of Union Pacific. And he basically said, regulatory issues notwithstanding, a Class 1 merger, future Class 1 mergers would be great, for various reasons. And of course, whether or not you agree or disagree is sort of relevant. The fact that he's saying this at all is important. I have no doubt that he probably sees some sort of window of opportunity for the reasons previously explained. So that's sort of big, that you actually have a railroad CEO coming out and saying, oh yeah, mergers, like, we'd be down for that. Which probably means that Union Pacific is almost certainly one of the railroads that is seriously considering another merger. You have BNSF, who said the vibe we get from our customers is that they really don't want this, which of course is interesting because BNSF, they have the biggest war chest out of any railroad and have the most money to sort of throw around in any potential merger. You have CSX and NS, who haven't come out and said anything, which I find sort of interesting because is that there's this general guideline that I follow, and this doesn't just apply to railroads, but it goes something like this, which is, if a company comes out and denies a rumor, there's typically a bit of truth to it. The most sort of glaring example that sort of sticks out in my mind is in, I think, like 2020 or 2019, there was a interview with Pat Ostermeyer in Railway Age, and William Ventura, the editor-in-chief, basically asked him, Pat Ostermeyer was the CEO of KCS, basically asked him, are you looking into any potential merger between KCS and another railroad? And he said, oh no, we're content on being independent and whatnot. And of course, we all know what happened later on when KCS and CP announced a merger, and then of course the whole sort of proxy fight with CN, and BNSF was off there lurking on the sides as well. And of course now CPKC is a thing. So there's that. Speaking of the Canadian railroads, CPKC has been pretty adamant in saying our merger is the last Class 1 merger because, the regulatory hurdles are so great at this point that no other Class 1 merger will be able to get through. So that's sort of interesting. I also think the fact that they have just gone through a merger and sort of the volatility with sort of the tariffs has put them in sort of an awkward position where there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding them and the system they sort of put together. And of course, there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding the fact that, well, CP did pay like $32 billion for KCS, and they have to find a way to pay that down. Tariffs have certainly put a dent in their plans, but again, that's all sort of another topic. There's also Canadian National. Canadian National, in their Q1 earnings call, their CEO, Tracy Robinson, asked a question from an analyst who she basically said, were there any potential future partnerships or consolidations that you're looking into? And Robinson basically said, oh yeah, partnerships, absolutely, right? Canadian National has been really good at starting these partnerships with other railroads. Falcon Service, which I appreciate as a CNW callback, and of course with the intermodal partnerships with Norfolk Southern into the southeast. But Robinson basically said, oh yeah, sort of giving the boilerplate answer that all railroad CEOs tend to give when this question has been raised up before, which is, oh yeah, we're not looking into it because there's too much regulatory risk. That's like oh, I don't want to really answer this question, just sort of go away sort of answer. Now, she has answered questions like this before and given similar responses. I remember after the CPKC merger, she was at some sort of shippers conference. I don't know if it was Mars or something else. I think it was at Mars. Basically saying, someone asked her, oh yeah, like in response to CPKC, are you going to pursue further acquisitions? And she basically said, oh yeah, like smaller ones maybe. Of course, we saw that bore fruit with Iowa Northern and Cape Breton and Nova Scotia buying a stake in that. But in terms of Class 1 railroads, nah, we're not looking into that. Which, I mean, if we go by my guideline, if they come out and deny a rumor, there's typically a bit of truth to it. CN could probably be looking into mergers, considering they've come out and denied that rumor multiple times by this point. That being said, when it comes to the Canadian railroads, it's sort of interesting. For the simple fact that the sort of larger, political and economic environment, I think, would make it increasingly difficult for a Canadian railroad to buy an American one, or vice versa. Now, just because, the sort of volatility of the past few months between our two countries, and of course, even before the great blowout of 2025, I still think it would be kind of hard. Especially Canada would not like one of our railroads coming in and taking over half their national rail infrastructure, and maybe the United States likewise with 1/4. I always thought it was a bit of a long shot. So there's that to factor in, but at the same time, like CN, could they, be looking into other people? Probably. I would suspect the answer is yes. CPKC, I think they're too distracted right now with too many other things, and they just put together a system of their own, so maybe not. They'd probably be in the worst situation if these dominoes decide to fall again, but that's besides the point. So yeah, there's that. Now, of course, there's a lot of hurdles for any potential Class 1 merger. There's the regulatory hurdles, which are very massive. So, if you don't know, the current Class 1 merger rules were put in place in 2001, and this was in response to BNSF and CN attempted a merger. And basically, no one wanted this to go through, except BNSF, CN, and also the Wisconsin Central. WC wanted it to go through, but as a result, the Surface Transportation Board basically rewrote the rules to include two factors. First, any potential Class 1 railroad merger has to not only maintain current competition, has to expand competition, which is incredibly difficult considering we're dealing with a bunch of duopolies at this point. Duopolies merging with other duopolies. And then the second rule was sort of in response to how a lot of railroads in the 90s utterly fucked their mergers. I'm looking at you, UPSP. Basically saying you have to be very careful about how you merge in order to minimize the effects of service disruptions in terms of shippers. So those are the two sort of those two combined make it incredibly hard for Class 1s to merge. Now, I guess one way you can get around the sort of competition issue is by instituting some form of open access. Hunter Harrison famously promised some form of open access through reciprocal switching with his various attempted mergers with Canadian Pacific and Norfolk Southern and CSX. Interestingly enough, in this article, Jim Vena does say that, oh yeah, if someone wants to compete with a merged like Union Pacific system, he'd be all fine with that, right? Now, does that mean he would be okay with, say, if they merge with an Eastern Railroad? Would he be okay with some form of open access? I don't know. His statement was kind of vague in that regard. And of course, Union Pacific is fairly famously pretty protective of their market reach and their network structure. Going back to the old Tennessee Pass debacle a few years ago. That's another story that just sort of fizzled out. But yeah. So I guess in conclusion, will we see Class 1 mergers in the future? The answer is maybe. It's probably more likely now than it has been at any point in the past, CPKC notwithstanding. Does this mean, just because, Jim Vena has come out and said, oh yeah, we're doing this, is CSX gonna, be swallowed up by UP tomorrow? Absolutely not. This could be another story that just sort of fizzles out, or it could be the start of something big, or it could be something in between, right? Railroad mergers are inherently complex things, and there's so many things that could just derail any potential merger. This is the only thing that has changed is that they've become slightly more, Class 1s have become slightly more serious about this topic. That could lead to mergers, or it could not. So, could jump to conclusions and say, oh yeah, it's going to happen, or you could just say, oh yeah, just dismiss it. But I guess we'll see what happens. But thank you all for watching this very unscripted video. Please subscribe for more future content that I occasionally put out. If you want to talk to me and my group of friends, we talk about this stuff all the time, so if you're into this too, maybe join the Discord. Yeah, I'll see y'all in the next one. Goodbye, everybody.